You are about to see, for the first time ever, photographic images of a second assassin who, firing from just inside the eastern portal of the pedestrian tunnel running under the triple underpass at the western end of Dealey Plaza, fired the second shot which struck President Kennedy, wounding him in the throat, and the fifth and final shot of five fired, which fatally struck the president in the right temple. The other three shots having missed the president, striking only Governor Connally, and having been fired from the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository by Lee Oswald. These images, though of admittedly poor quality, are quite real, and were taken from a handful of frames taken from the 7th and 13th second minute marks of the 16mm news film taken by TV newsman James Darnell, as his camera swung wildly back and forth as he ran after having jumped from the convertible camera car 3 of the presidential motorcade within seconds of the final fatal shot. This video, the second in a series of 10, will focus chiefly only upon these images of the assassin and an earlier discovered image, viewable only to those with severe red-green color blindness, of a Dallas police officer also in the tunnel and acting as the accomplice to the assassin. Said discovery of that earlier image having prompted me to understand how the murder was actually perpetrated and to undertake an exhaustive search for any photo images of the pedestrian tunnel entry taken during the assassination. Briefly then, before we begin examining the actual James Darnell images of the assassin in detail, here is how the assassination was actually carried out. Having gotten in position to fire at the president as his car approached the second assassin directly in a prearranged killing zone, the second assassin began firing simultaneously with Oswald from atop a stepladder located behind an open utility closet door just inside the Commerce Street pedestrian tunnel. So here, other than a very brief reference to the infamous grassy knoll, which was a diversion meant to be seen, all the other particular aspects of the assassination will be covered in great detail in the next 8 videos in the series. At the outset, you must understand why no one, and I mean no one, would have been in that tunnel unless they were up to no good, for 2 reasons. The first is that although it had rained earlier that morning, for some time before and during the assassination, it was an absolutely gorgeous sunny day in Dallas, with the temperature about 64 degrees. So no one would have chosen to view the presidential motorcade from that tunnel, which any resident of Dallas can tell you is a dark, dank, filthy, depressing hole, which then as now smells of human urine and is littered with cigarette butts and trash. But perhaps because of the gunfire, someone might have taken refuge in that tunnel. This brings up the second reason no one would have been in that tunnel, because not only weren't there any spectators near enough to flee into the tunnel, but moreover, that would have been contrary to human curiosity and what the crowd actually did. For hardly had the echoes from the gunshots stopped ringing out when, attracted by the diversion of a firecracker report and smoke on the grassy knoll, at first dozens, then hundreds of spectators immediately converged upon the grassy knoll. This simple magician's trick of misdirection worked incredibly well by drawing everyone's attention to the grassy knoll and directly away from the second assassin's real location, allowing him to escape not only unnoticed and unmolested, but indeed undiscovered for over 60 years. Returning to the second assassin's actual image, I've selected 3 frames from the Darnell film, which we'll now review in several magnifications and contrasts. Do keep in mind how easy this shot would be as the car was moving directly toward the tunnel in a straight line. Here in the first frame I've selected, the portal appears just above the policeman's drawn revolver. Now I've zoomed in and turned up the contrast, highlights, and warmth. Here I've increased the brightness yet again. Here we see the policeman's revolver, the policeman's hat in the foreground. We see a bystander in the foreground. Here we see the actual opening of the arcade, and there's a slight distortion here of the curvature at the top. This item here I believe to be a step ladder. See the box shape in there. This is some distortion off a windshield of a car in between the arcade opening and our viewpoint. This is the actual shooter. He's putting the rifle back into the steel utility cabinet. This is his hand, the bottom of his right arm, the top of his right arm, his shoulder, the front of his pants, the back of his pants, the seat of his pants, and his back. And again, I believe this is a stepladder. In this second frame, taken some seconds later, the policeman, and indeed Darnell and the camera, have both moved. And again, we'll go from the wider angle to progressively enlarged versions, which I've also adjusted and contrasted. Please note that now we're looking at the tunnel opening. Here's the arch. There's a person's head. Here's the body with a black background all around. We're looking over the shoulder of a civilian pedestrian in between. Our policeman has moved over here. Here is our person in the foreground, walking along. This is not a person in the foreground, and I'll demonstrate why in just a second. But again, this is roughly 7 to 10 seconds after the first photo. And this is someone standing right inside the arcade, and the proportions are correct. And we're now looking between cars. There's no car in between to block our view because Darnell has moved. The reason we can determine that the person at the blue arrow is inside the tunnel and not in the foreground is because from a frame of the Atkins film taken at the same time from a different angle, we can see that the pedestrian at the red arrow in the foreground is much closer to Darnell's camera and a bit lower than the man inside the tunnel, as the tunnel is elevated about a foot higher than the street. Finally, in this third frame a bit later, I've again started at the wider angle and progressively adjusted enlargement, lighting, and contrast to finally arrive at this image. Please note the image is indeed tilted as Darnell is walking while filming. In this image, I believe the individual there has his back to the camera and he is wearing light clothing and probably dressed as a workman in overalls, a soldier or airman in summer uniform khakis or suntans, or possibly even a member of the Texas Rangers who wore similarly colored uniforms. I believe he is the assassin, and with his partner, probably dressed as or is a Dallas policeman, has just replaced the rifle in the utility cabinet after having moved the stepladder away from the tunnel entry. I believe this is the extended right arm of the assassin. This is the door of the utility closet. The bottom of his right arm comes down to the point of an elbow, goes up along the back of his arm. I believe this is the trunk of his body, what appears to be the extension of his right thigh, and what appears to be his lower pant leg, all the way down the back of his lower pant leg, coming back around. The shoulder, the right shoulder, the left shoulder, possibly the elbow with the hand, the left elbow with the hand reaching forward would be his waist. The seat of his pants on the left. I can make out darkness here, which I believe is the back of his head. And there appears to be a different color here. I don't know if that is a service cap or what it is, but I'll leave that to you. The evidentiary clue which enabled me as an extremely red-green colorblind person to find the key to solve the assassination was in the form of a tiny portion of this photograph taken about 25 to 30 seconds after the fatal shot was fired by UPI photographer Frank Cancellari. In a hugely enlarged, high-resolution electronic copy of this image, I am able to see unmistakably the image of a policeman in flight to the west through the third portal of the tunnel. And this was critical for me to understand how the crime was committed. There's also a stepladder visible. As I stated, I have an extreme form of red-green color blindness called deuteranopia, which only 1 in 100 men, and virtually no women, share with me, meaning 99.5% of you viewing this image will see only a mess of confused haziness. This is critically important for you to understand because during World War II, it was discovered that some red-green colorblind soldiers could spot camouflaged enemy positions that were invisible to those with normal color vision, that in certain situations, people with certain types of color blindness could recognize patterns invisible to all others. Please understand, what I have found is not the recognition of anthropomorphic shapes in random backgrounds. That's called pareidolia. So I'm not imagining that I see the Virgin Mary in a toasted bagel. What I am seeing is the poor but unmistakable image of a man dressed as a Dallas policeman in flight. He is visible in the third portal of the pedestrian tunnel that runs under the Triple Railroad underpass out of Dealey Plaza. After hiding the rifle in that utility cabinet and locking it, he fled west out of the tunnel and was captured on film through the third portal at the location of the X above. Fortunately, almost all of you with normal color vision will not be able to see the gunman's image in Frank Cancellari's photo. However, with an extreme version of a portion of that photo, some of you may be able to see part of the gunman's face as follows. Zooming in on the fleeing policeman's head as shown and using CyberLink Photo Director, Microsoft Paint, and Microsoft Photos, I bounce this image back and forth between them while adjusting exposure, zoom, lightness, contrast, shadows, and multiple darkness tabs to arrive at this super enlarged but pixelated image of a Dallas cop's face and hat. Because the right side of the face is so pixelated, I blacked out the right side of the face to make it easier to see. Here I've introduced a Dallas police white hat with black visor and a period-correct Dallas badge for comparison. Now I've outlined the nose, the bottom of the lower lip, and chin with yellow dotted lines, with the green arrow pointing to the top of the nose, the blue arrow to the right nostril, and the red arrow to the bottom of the chin, which again I'll overlay with the original. Moving up to the policeman's hat, the blue arrow at the top shows the center of the raised star on the badge, which matches the raised star on the Dallas Police badge shield at the bottom. Also note that the red arrows point to the black elastic band above the hat visor in both images, and that in the image on the left, the visor, black band, and visible portions of the raised badge star are outlined with black dotted lines. This is the face of one of President Kennedy's actual killers. Before I, a completely ordinary man, describe to you how I extracted that tiny image from this photo, I would be criminally and morally remiss if I did not share my belief with you of the astronomically remote statistical chance that a 68-year-old ordinary man who just happens to be very colorblind would feel compelled to purchase from Getty Images for $499 a super high resolution copy of this historic photograph as being nothing short of miraculous. Now for the next 75 seconds, I'll demonstrate how I found that image. Opening the Cancellari image in Microsoft Photos, I will zoom in on the image and increase it by 20%. I will then scroll to the west and center upon the third using the crop function. I'll zoom in over the hood of this white Chevrolet. Next, using the adjustment function, increase the brightness, increase the exposure, increase the contrast, and increase the shadows. Next, using the filter function, I'll select calm. Here I subsequently enlarged, lightened, and labeled the image, which to you almost certainly appears as random noise, but which is to me a fuzzy but unmistakable image of a man. In order to guard against the destruction of this image in the original negative held by Getty Images, friends have independently of me purchased and downloaded this same high-resolution image from Getty Images, which I have neither ownership of or access to, in order to prove this image is indeed in the original negative. Now, for nearly all of you with normal color vision, please skip ahead about 3 minutes to the end of this video for a link to video chapter 3, where we'll examine the assassin's setup during the ambulance diversion and Lee Oswald's first shot, and why he missed. And for those few of you who may be red-green colorblind, for the final minutes of this video, I've presented tinted, labeled, and large contrasted versions of the image in the hope that you may be able to see it. Note the image of the outlined revolver and holster combination next to the officer's weapon. Now on the original enlargement, the revolver location within the square. Now zooming in, I've superimposed the holster to the right in each image, and on the extreme left outlined the holster in white dots and the pistol grip in yellow dots. Please notice that in both images, the dotted images are the same shape as the superimposed holster to the right. Now in the box on the right, please note the very faint, lighter, but definitely discernible image of the pistol grip. Now here's the entire original, and it's very faint, but give yourself some time, and if you're red-green colorblind enough, you'll make out the features as unmistakably human.